Commission. The state office definitions are extremely important because they dictate who is eligible and who is ineligible from applying to serve on the Citizens Redistricting Commission. While most of the Proposition 11 provisions and restrictions are clearly spelled out, the provision in question is one that requires interpretation. Section 8252 of the measure states that an individual is ineligible for applying to serve on the Commission if, within the 10 years immediately preceding the date of the application, the applicant or a member of his or her immediate family has, quote, been appointed to, elected to, or have been a candidate for federal or state office. How expansively or narrowly this prohibition is defined is open to interpretation, as is noted in the State Auditor's Memorandum Number 2. The California Voter Foundation believes that on its face, the language appears to be describing state elective office, since only these types of offices are the kinds that someone could be a candidate for or be elected to. And in this interpretation, the idea of appointing someone is taken to mean appointed to fill a vacancy for an elective office. However, the state auditor has interpreted the term state office to apply rather to every state office, agency, department, division, bureau, board, and commission within the government of the state of California. We believe this interpretation of the definition of state office is overly broad, and applying it would do a disservice to the initiative by unnecessarily limiting the number of qualified applicants. When one considers that this prohibition would apply to not just every current appointee, but anyone ever appointed in the past 10 years, along with their immediate family members, as broadly defined by the initiative to include parents, siblings, and in-laws, the draft definition would effectively bar potentially hundreds of thousands of people from applying to serve on the commission. Furthermore, many citizens who serve on boards and commissions do so on a voluntary basis. They may receive some meager per diem or stipend, but for the most part, board and commission appointees are providing volunteer services to the state of California and are likely to be the very kinds of people who would be interested in serving on the Citizens Compensation Commission. The philosophical question that the state auditor needs to consider is whether to create a narrow funnel on the front end of the application process that dramatically restricts applicants in such a fashion in order to effectively preclude any possibility of a political insider or crony from applying and serving on the commission, or whether to have a wide funnel on the front end and rely on other provisions of the initiative to weed out any applicants who have a potential partisan or political agenda. It is the view of the California Voter Foundation that there are many other opportunities in the applicant selection process to review applicants for their ability to be impartial. Indeed, it is one of just 3 qualities that determine whether an applicant is qualified to serve on the commission or not. CVF believes that it is better to allow a wide funnel at the beginning of the application process and rely on the work of the applicant review panel, the public comment process, and the legislative strikes process to weed out any applicants with a partisan or political agenda. To place such a narrow funnel on the front end of the application process will do a disservice to the initiative in that it will wipe out large numbers of potential applicants who otherwise may be highly qualified to serve on the commission and would be inclined to do so. Specifically, CVF suggests revising 60828 to read as follows. State office means every state elective office within the government of the state of California. Another definition relating to state office is the definition for the term appointed to federal or state office, for which a definition is also included in the draft regulations and is also open to interpretation, as is noted in Memorandum Number 2. The initiative does not specify to which appointing authority this restriction applies. The state auditor has drafted regulations that would include all appointments made by the governor and the legislature. However, the initiative states several times and very clearly that its purpose is to shape political districts free from legislative influence. For example, in the findings and purpose under D, it says, the reform takes redistricting out of the partisan battles of the legislature. Section 3.3 of the initiative says the selection process is designed to produce a citizens redistricting commission that is independent from legislative influence. Based on these facts, the California Voter Foundation believes if the definition of state office remains as currently drafted, it should be applied to appointments made by the legislature and not those made by the governor. Or if you keep the governor's appointees on the prohibited list, consider limiting it to only those that require Senate confirmation. Yet another way the definition of appointed to state office could be narrowed is to include only salaried appointments in the restriction, and you've heard many comments to this effect today. The basis for this approach is simple. Someone who's been appointed to a paid salaried position from a legislator or Board of Equalization member is beholden to their appointee for their livelihood and may be perceived as owing a debt or favor to that person. The advantage of this approach is that it would be easy for the applicant, the public, and the applicant review panel to verify whether an applicant is indeed qualified to serve, since whether a person is on the state of California payroll is a matter of public record. And in fact, anyone can go to the Sacramento Bee's website and look up state worker pay rates if they want to verify someone's application. Thus, we have suggestions for 4 ways to narrow the definition for state office and appointed to state office that would greatly expand the number of people who would be eligible to apply for the new commission. Number 1, define state office as state elective office. Number 2, remove appointments made by the governor from the list of prohibited appointees. Number 3, include only those appointments made by the governor that require Senate confirmation. And number 4, only include salaried appointees in the definition. One additional suggestion is to change the word limit in 60847 relating to the Phase 2 application from 250 words to 500, as 250 words may unnecessarily restrict applicants' abilities to adequately express their qualifications to serve on the commission. I'm happy to be available to you now or later to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Do any of the panel members have questions?
I have a question. To give the conflict of interest provision regarding appointment to state office your meaning, don't we have a problem here in that it says been appointed to, elected to, or have been a candidate for federal or state office? If it was intended to be just elective state office, or why wouldn't it say elective state office? As we see later in the initiative, the term elective public office is used, presumably to distinguish it from a non-elective public office.
That's a great question, and we were not involved in drafting the initiative, but my guess is that the reason why it's not stated there is because it would appear redundant, because it says in the beginning of that phrase, elected to, appointed to, or a candidate for state office. It seems to me that those 3 activities, elected, appointed, or a candidate for, are all talking about this phrase state office, and therefore only state offices where those kinds of verbs could apply are covered in the definition of, are covered in that definition. So I think it would be awkward to have written appointed to, a candidate for, or elected to an elective state office. I mean, I think it maybe would have been clearer and we wouldn't be having to have this discussion right now. But when I first read the initiative on its face, because those 3 terms were all grouped together, I took it to mean, oh, they mean someone appointed to fill an elective state office, because you can't run for an appointed office. You can't be well, actually, you can be a candidate for an appointed office, and this actually raises an important issue someone brought up to me, which is the way that this definition is currently worded, anyone who submitted their name to be considered for any appointed position would technically be a candidate for a state office, because they would be putting their name forward if you read it that way. So I think whatever you guys decide to do on this, and I know that this is a confusing issue for all of us, but I think the consensus is that we want a bright line, we want something that's verifiable, we don't want confusion. Personally, California Voter Foundation wants a wide funnel at the front end of this process, because ultimately we want you to be able to choose from a vast number of qualified applicants. And when you consider that 10-year time frame and the extension to immediate family as broadly defined by this initiative, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of people, the very kinds of people who would be inclined to want to serve on this commission. So I think that I trust the applicant review panel, the public comment process, and the legislative strikes process to protect the selection process, insulate it from a political insider getting through all the way to that stage, and that we don't need to put such a tight funnel at the front end to prevent people from applying.
On a smaller point, the issue that you raised about what if someone submits 2 applications and you want us to put into the regulation essentially an out for someone who accidentally submits an application so that we would only eliminate somebody who intentionally submits 2 applications. How would you suggest we make that determination as the Bureau when we receive 2 applications from the same person to know whether we're dealing with somebody who intentionally versus